All right, hello and welcome. It is Wednesday, August 16th, and we are going to start out with a discussion of your submissions from last week. And we will also be talking about the new assignments starting here in week 3. So you have now finished out your first game composition. You have created all of the music for 2D platformer. You have the files divided out into 9 individual cues that randomized and rearranged themselves into multiple different orders to create the soundtrack that you hear. And we talked about the idea of intros, loops, and endings. You also created all of the sound effects for that game. Um, and then you took the opportunity to put all of the sound effects into the game to test them out. Listen to your music along with your sound effects. Maybe you identified some changes or some issues with everything. And there's always the opportunity to revise and change any of the approaches. And then once you had everything working in the game and sounding correctly, you used QuickTime to do a video capture to be able to show everything off. So this is the overall process that we will follow again for our next game. But of course, it'll be a new game, new soundtrack, new approach to the music, new style of music, and an overall new approach to how the music is set up and playing back in the game. So we'll get into that this afternoon. And but first, we want to take the opportunity to take a listen to the submissions for the week 2 optional feedback and review. We had 9 submissions with a variety of YouTube links posted up there. Again, I encourage everyone to submit so that we can have something to discuss and talk about, and you'll get a little bit more of opportunity for feedback as I kind of point and discuss my way through different elements of the submission. So last round, we loaded up Logic and actually went through just the music component of your composition. And now, at this point, we have videos. Let's see, I have 9 different videos here to check out. So this is the final version of everything with the music and sound effects working together. And I typically find that once you have the music at this point, music and sound effects and everything, some of the stuff that we discussed when we were picking apart your music, a lot of that can get glossed over with all, at this point you have the music, you have the sound effects, you have the graphics, you have the interactivity and the gameplay. There's a lot for the player to absorb as they're playing the game. And so while we went through with fine-tooth comb your submissions with your composition, I find that the final versions of these projects ultimately end up where the sum is great. No, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts, meaning that you could probably sit there and find all sorts of issues going individually by music and your sound effects files. But once you put it all together, along with the interactivity of the game, they work well together. So some of the things that we are listening for is how, one of the main things is how the music and sound effects interact. That nothing is completely buried in the mix. Also, nothing is sticking out too far where it doesn't feel like it's a cohesive part of the rest of the mix. There is a discussion, and you'll probably hear me talk about this, the idea of which should be louder, your music or your sound effects. And maybe there was the possibility that you bounced out you like created and composed your music, you bounced everything out, and then you created all of your sound effects and bounced all of those out. And then when you put them together in the game, you realize that either the music or the sound effects are completely out of bounds, typically volume-wise, or maybe it's frequency or panning or something like that. Some aspect of the mix, most often volume. So we don't want anything sticking out or being completely masked or buried. So then the question is which should be louder, your music or your sound effects? Typically in a game, your sound effects are quite loud. I would include dialogue with that. Typically, dialogue is king. Dialogue is the story that is the most easily identifiable in a mix. Sound effects are the information of what's going on, and so you have to hear a punch or a jump or a power up or sound. And music is often there as an underscore to the rest of the mix to drive the emotional context of the audio. So in that case, sound effects would be louder. However, you are a music student, and this is a music demo showing off your music composition. So there is a good argument that your music will be louder in the mix. And that part ultimately is up to you. The main thing that we are listening for is that everything should be balanced amongst the music, and everything should be balanced amongst the sound effects, and then you can judge music versus sound effects. Sometimes we will hear like the gunshot. The gunshot is going to be the most constant sound effect. So if somebody's laying into the button and just spamming it and hitting it a million miles an hour, then you'll just constantly hear a gunshot, and it will mask. Even if it's not really all that loud, depending on the frequency content, it can mask the rest of the mix. So you have to be aware of that. Sometimes maybe the gunshot may not need to be extremely loud in the mix because it might be constant enough that you can still really identify it. Sometimes the dialogue is too low in the mix, since a lot of the other sound effects, gunshots and power-ups and, bombs and things like that, are going to be sound effects that are pulled from the library and typically professionally produced in a strong volume overall. Maybe a recorded vocal didn't have as much gain or much level comparatively. So balancing recorded sound effects versus library sound effects, music versus sound effects, all of those things should be thought of and just kind of approached as you are creating the mix. So we're listening music versus sound effects and listening to like the intros and endings. Something that I often suggest, and something else that I see, is that folks will do this video capture and play the game like they're trying to win the game, which isn't necessarily the best way to show off your music and sound effects. Typically, the video should be, it's highly suggested that they're around 60 seconds to 90 seconds long. You're really not going to get somebody's attention for much longer than that, especially in this type of game where once you get the idea, once you've heard all the sound effects, it's pretty constant from then on. So 60 to 90 seconds should be quite enough to show everything off in these videos. And you want to make sure that you show everything off, where you actually show off a couple of intros and endings by losing. I see a lot of people just sort of blast their way through there, and they're racking up a high score, and they're all of the enemies are defeated and you never hear any endings, or maybe most people will at least trigger one of them. But you created 3 intros and 3 endings, and so 6 files, and we're only hearing 2 of them. So you want to be able to show off all of your work, trigger all of the sound effects that you can. As I go through all these, when I'm grading them, I am most interested in the process, the fact that you have created and composed the music, you've built all of the sound effects, you put them in the game, tested them out, you created this video capture to show everything off. I'm not as concerned with the grade, with the content of the video, because what you actually want to show off and how you play the game, that part is up to you. That is your portfolio work. That's your demo. It's what you want to show off. I'm certainly not counting all of the audio files, like the music and sound effects, because I ultimately know because I know you ultimately don't have control of all of the sound effects and the music, where most of the time you could get 8 of the 9 music files to play, but for some reason that third ending never isn't triggered in 90 seconds, and you're most interested in showing off good gameplay as opposed to focusing and making sure that every single sound is triggered in 90 seconds. So that's the main thing we're looking for. Sometimes we hear that the complete audio soundtrack for the video was not recorded digitally using loopback, which is suggested in the assignment, because you hear everything captured through the internal microphone. If a program like Loopback or Soundflower is not used to digitally capture the output of your game, then it will default to playing out of your speakers and then being re-recorded into your microphone. And number one, the quality of that is no good, because it's basically a very thin analog recording. And I also hear creepy things in the background, like just the person breathing while they're playing and typing on the keyboard, and their dog barking in the background, or their family talking, or something like that. Somebody doing the dishes, or whatever. That's certainly not the thing you want to show off. You want to show off the quality and the work that you put into creating the soundtrack, so you don't want it to be defeated just by how you captured it. So watch out, and if that happens, then my first guess is that you didn't ever watch the video, and you didn't actually play it back and listen to it to hear the quality of the recording. So always double check your work, check the video before you send it off. And so those are the things that we are listening for overall. We'll go ahead and play through these. If they're longer than 90 seconds, I may not play through everything once we get an idea, and I'll probably jump around a little bit to point things out at some point. I'm going to turn this down and we'll check our levels. Here's our first one. Alright, that gunshot is quite loud. I have everything turned way down. Kind of scared of turning it up too much. So the gunshot especially really masks the rest of the music and the rest of the sound effects when it plays. Let's see. Watch out for there's some of the taunts that you got stuck. There's some of the taunts that seem to be masked. Yeah, you might want to watch out for things where you get stuck like this, just to cut it out and edit it out of the video, or just do another video pass. So I would definitely watch out for, and just bring the music up overall. Watch the editing of the dialogue, the different taunts where they seem to be the back end of them are cut off. The tail of the file seems to be cut off too short. So watch out for that. I still hear the metronome, even when it's very buried overall. So so it looks like everything works. You just would need to do another pass of balancing your audio files. All right, let's do the next one here. Turn this down.
Bring it on. Bring it on. Bring it on. Try again. Bring it on. Try again.
All right, so that worked out very well. Everything looked like it was playing back correctly. The mix worked out nicely. The only thing might be the volume of that gunshot across the rest of the mix because you're constantly firing. Then it does kind of mask some of the details overall. I might address that. Some of that is the tail of the gunshot, the fact that it's much more of a kind of Hollywood gunshot that's got that long crack in the strong crack in the front of it, and then the long tail, which doesn't much sound like what a real gunshot sounds like, but that's certainly what it sounds like in movies, and that's what a lot of the library ones sound like. But in this situation where it's so fast, you might focus either through some sort of transient plugin or through EQ and certainly volume and editing to shorten the tail and really focus on the attack of the gunshot to leave room for some of the other effects. But that's a really small detail overall because everything really feels like it's working. I would say just in general as a demo, you should probably lose more often, like you're just dominating through the whole thing, which is great, but you want to show off more of the intros and endings. In a presentation like this, there was one pickup here. Was it a health pickup? This one, maybe. Yeah, I think that one was it. I like that. I like that health pickup because it's got this cool right, well, at least in my headphones, if I have my headphones on correctly, a right to left pan, which is cool. Right here. Cool. It sounds cool to me with my headphones on right here. You might consider whatever the final platform is. Like if this was on a smartphone game, then maybe they wouldn't have too many people. Well, I guess you'd be listening with earbuds, but if it came out of the speaker, you'd lose the sort of stereo stuff. So those are always just small things to point out. But overall, everything worked out well and sounds good on that one. Let's jump into the next one here. I think everything worked out there. Sounds like everything was playing back and triggering correctly. Some of the dialogue, which I'm going to guess was recorded, sounded either far off or distant or like in a different space. Maybe it's a reverb or something that was on it, or how it was recorded. And so those were a little bit less intelligible to be able to tell what he was saying. The gunshot. Yeah, the gunshot has a cool. It doesn't have a strong attack as much, but it has a cool like blast sound, a kind of sound to it. So that works out nicely, even when you're firing it rapidly. Yeah, some of the mix of the balance of the like the fuse, the pickup of a bomb versus the fuse of the bomb versus the blow up of the bomb might need to be balanced a little bit more, but sounds good. I do the same thing. It really only looks like you did one pass of intros and endings, so add a few more of those. All right, we're doing good so far. So, I think the music works out very nicely. I would say that maybe this one would be an example of where the music is mixed louder than the sound effects, which certainly works for this demo. There is between the different sound effect files mix, there is some inconsistencies. Like your gunshot is almost non-existent, and some of the, I don't know if it's deaths or taunts, are too loud or too soft overall. I think the music is pretty consistent all the way across. There's some just a small thing to point out with the endings. And it's good because you have a couple of them in here. So that works. You got a couple of intros and endings. So let's fast forward into one of these endings. Maybe here. Okay. So they either get cut off at the end or go into the intros. There's like a little like pause or hiccup where they feel like the endings get cut off. And that might just be how they're edited, where they go all the way up to the very end of the file, and they might need a little bit of hold. Let me jump into another one of these. Yeah, just whatever that little hiccup is. So I think melodically I like the intros and endings. I like how they build and resolve. And yeah, I would think it would just be finding which of the sound effects is I don't know, not the most consistent, but like the foundation of the mix to say, and it might be the gunshot. If you have not, then back in a Logic session, take all of your music and all of your sound effects and put them in the same session and balance them. Make sure, like, as you just put your music on loop and keep throwing sound effects in there and bounce them up or down according to whatever you need to get a solid mix. And then I think that you can maintain where the music is at a more solid, consistent level, figure out where the gunshot is against that, and then balance all the rest of the sound effects against that. Very good. All right, keep moving forward here. Turn down this one.
Try again.
Like the jumps and the enemies. I hope that's you with your voice pitched up. That'd be great. Oh, I see. The enemy deaths are like more kind of robotic. All right. I definitely make the video longer make the video longer, show off a couple more intros and endings. Again, music works well, but some of the sound effects, like the gunshot, doesn't seem like it's there. I don't know if it's just really mixed really low or if it just wasn't working for some reason. The jumps work.
Try again.
The taunts work. Like that pickup was really small. Once you get all of the sound effects playing, they're like constantly playing, and there's a lot of them, then maybe the sound effects might be a little bit loud. Although the like the jumps and taunts are funny and fun while they are louder overall. So, and the music, I mean, music is working just fine in the background. And yeah, that it transitions and works out correctly. So just yeah, figuring out where some of those sound effects went to in the mix. All right, try another one here. Again, yeah, 38 seconds might be a little too short to show off everything that you want. Let's see.
You got all the backup. Listen to me, you space Nazi.
Let's try. Yeah, I'll definitely make it longer. Would like some more from all that. The dialogue is well produced. Hopefully that's all your voice. That would be great.
Listen to me, you space Nazi.
The jumps work. So the only thing I would say is the gunshot. Everything, like the music's like real tough, and the big voice overall, everything sounds like big and mean, and then it's like a little pew 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 kind of sound. So maybe a little bit more beef to the gunshot. I mean, production wise, music works. I would maybe have a discussion on the appropriateness for this type of game, but if it was more of a spacey kind of, I don't know, like a tough spacey game, then that certainly would work. But production-wise, it certainly works. The endings which was why I would enjoy hearing more of the endings. The ending sounds good, but it might just be a little short. Like it works because you kind of splash down there. Where'd it go? Works there, but it creates a lot of silence. Either that hit that you do for the endings needs to like blast and delay and reverb and extend out for a while, or you would write a bar or so of music and like of resolution, and then hit that last impact and have it fade. So, yeah, most of those are tweaks to the good production level there. We'll see. We'll try the next one here. Whoa, that was quick. May not, as a demo, you may not want to start out that way because it kind of throws people off.
Let's get it.
Oi.
Come on. Let's get it. Come on. Let's get it.
Oi. 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 Oi.
Let's get it.
Oi.
Nice circle of the fist background, like that. Okay, I think everything pretty much works here. Music works well, progresses nicely. I would say maybe the recorded sound effects, like your voice, versus the library sound effects, like the gunshots, some of the pickups and whatnot, bomb explode, are a bit low in volume. The jump kind of gets lost because it's really kind of short.
Come on. Let's
Trying to
get
hear it. So it would be a balance of some of the sound effects against each other. I think I like the gunshot. Endings work out nicely.
Let's get it.
Oi.
Yeah, I don't think the gunshot. I don't think the gunshot over or masks or is overbearing to the rest of the mix. So yeah, just some of the recorded sound effects, bring those up to the same kind of power and volume of the other rest of the sound effects. Yeah, I think music and sound effects work against each other. So nice work. All right, looks like we got two more to check out. So let's try this one.
¿Está bien? ¿Está bien? Eso.
All right. I like the music in the main loops. I think that overall, mostly the music and sound effects are working well. The gunshot is kind of missing the detail or the body of the rest of the gunshot. It feels almost like a rapping or a knocking kind of sound. It could have a little bit more of the like the body of a gunshot, the tail of it, which I know I talked about previously. I mean, the good thing about this one is you can fire it extremely fast, and it doesn't kind of overbearing. It's not too overbearing, but it doesn't sound as one might expect something like that to end up sounding like. So maybe another pass in the gunshot. And then the intros and endings. I like what's going on in the main loops, but they feel kind of repetitive. Like the ending needs to resolve more. It just repeats the same phrase and kind of stops. The intros repeat the same phrase and then just drop into one of the main loops. So I think there's a little bit more activity going on in the main loops. So what else? I think the rest of the sound effects are working pretty well. Even your the dialogue works. Jumps work, taunts work. Yeah, and just for maybe the demo sake, you're just hitting that the fire button constantly, which may mask a bit of what the rest of what you're trying to show off. So I'd say first and foremost would be the gunshot sound, and then intros and endings. Yeah, but again, the production quality, the sound effects works, the quality of what's going on in the music works. So very good. We'll try one more here.
How's that been?
Alright, well, it's got all the original sound effects from the game, so you're going to want to put your own sound effects in there for the demo. So we're hearing... This would be kind of the opposite of what I recommended when I said that people just playing the game and not showing off intros and endings. This one would be kind of confusing because you're not actually playing in anything. So some of that might be because of the sound effects. But yeah, you definitely want to be able to show off all aspects of the game. I think the music is transitioning and playing back
How's
correctly.
that been?
Could use a little bit of development through the main loops and intros and endings. So yeah, definitely get your sound effects in there and take another pass at the demo, kind of playing it as and showing off all that stuff. Still, I mean, within a minute, you had the opportunity to show off the intros and endings, so still do some of that, but also show the rest of it off. All right. So I think that was. I think I got everybody's link there. I'll just look at all the names. Yeah. Yeah, that looks correct. So again, I hope this encourages those that haven't participated thus far to throw up your links up there, and your next round we'll be listening to our Angry Bots compositions from this week. And again, you get, like we talk about, your individual submission, but I also think it's very beneficial that you see everybody else's approach. We saw lots of good ideas in there. Nothing was like completely didn't work. I mean, in 2 weeks, you've basically created an interactive music soundtrack, built a bank of sound effects, and got it all working and tested out in the game. And created the video capture along with it. So, and one of the challenges that I find in all of this is that you really don't get to see how it's all going to work together until the very end, when you've created typically you create the music and the sound effects in a separate session at a separate time and bounce them out separately, and it's not until you put them all in the game, which may very well be at late on Sunday night, right before the deadline, you're like, oh, okay, well, maybe it's 70 or 80 or 90% of the way where I thought it was going to be, but there's probably some tweaks, and everybody had a few things to point out. There's always room for improvements overall, but do understand that, again, that will happen again for Angry Bots, where you want to probably take the opportunity to combine your music and sound effects sometime this week. Well, I guess you're not doing your sound effects this week. Sometime early in week 4 to kind of head that off at the pass. And now that you've seen the whole round and this whole overall approach, to see where to go next with all of that. So let's go ahead and wrap that up for now. And we'll switch into our new week 3 assignments. Please let me know if you have any questions. Thanks. So now we are going to switch over and discuss the new week 3 assignments. So now that you have done the first round with our first project, 2D platformer, we will now go into the second 2 weeks and get into our second project. If I go here, there we go. So this is FSO, and here in week 3, you have the new Angry Bots composition with a series of videos that reference the composition in the preparation, recording, and composition of this type of project. A couple of different approaches to help you get started. Then we have a chiptune composition, where, since we're going to talk a bit about, we did talk about the history of music and technology and genres of music for games. We're going to give you a bit of a taste of that with a particular composition here, where the main restriction is using the original limitations of the original Nintendo system. So we discussed that the NES had 4 basic waveform channels, and you're going to compose a composition using those same restrictions. So I'll discuss that here in a bit. And then we have the opportunity to submit next week for peer review. Had a few more people or different people submit this round, which is always excellent. We always want to encourage everybody, or as many people as possible, to participate, so we can get a variety of different projects there. And then the rest of we got the class and suggested reading material. So that's what we have in store. Let's discuss your project for this week. Our new game called Angry Bots. So as I mentioned, where'd it go? hopefully you took the opportunity to download this week's game. Maybe you have played it and taken a chance to get a sense of what the game's about. Maybe took a look through the documentation. But a new game this week requires a new style of music and a new music soundtrack and new sound effects. Now that you've gone through the process once, you basically have the structure or the schedule for everything, and we're going to follow very much the same flow for Angry Bots, where this week you'll do the composition, next week you'll do all of the sound design, and you'll put it into the game and create a video capture. So this game, again, is called Angry Bots. It is made by Unity Games using the Unity game engine. We'll talk a bit more about that this week as we dive into some of the technology of getting your music to work actually in the game. The Unity game engine is a very popular tool to make all sorts of different types of games. If you play a lot of mobile games, iOS and Android games, then more than likely you've played something that's been built on the Unity game engine. And Angry Bots here is a kind of a game demo where not only is it a game, but you can actually get access to all of the art and the music and the sound and the code and the program, like all the pieces of it. And so the people that were learning art can tear it apart on that side, and the people that are learning code and programming can tear apart a game project like this from that point of view. And we over here on the music and sound team are going to reference it and use it as a demo for showing off our music and sound. So this type of game, it's a much number one, it's a much more full and complete game. It does actually take like 5 or 10 minutes to get through from beginning to end. It does actually have an end. It is what might be considered like a complete game level of a much larger game. It is kind of certainly a darker and grittier style overall. It's modern and kind of futuristic, a much more intense feel than 2D platformer from last round. It is having this sort of modern approach to the game, or kind of futuristic feel. You are this mercenary who's infiltrating the robot factory, and the robots are certainly not happy that you're there, and so they are there to take you out, and you're going to battle your way deeper and deeper into this factory. So there are battles that are constantly happening, and that's one of the main thing. Well, that is the main thing that we are directing our music from. The main musical idea that we're focused on in this composition is the idea of ambient and action. Our music is going to need to transition smoothly between ambient gameplay and action gameplay, where ambient doesn't refer, like, it's not a room tone or rain or anything. It's not like a sound effect ambience. It also doesn't mean the genre of ambient music, meaning that it's just like slow and drone and boring and doesn't move or change. Ambient just means less than action. There's no battle going on at that point. So this is often referred to as battle and exploration. So during exploration, you're just kind of wandering around. There's no bad guys around. All of a sudden, a robot jumps out or a bad guy jumps out, and the action music kicks in. And we have to be able to switch musically, seamlessly back and forth between a lower intensity ambient game state and a higher intensity action game state. Question here in the chat. Do you think a minor key signature would be appropriate for this game? Absolutely. For this, you're going for intense and battles and firefights and robots and explosions and heroic and adventure and all of these big and intense ideas. It's a lot easier to get away with that in a minor key, even with some kind of diminished tonality to it, where it you can get that intensity and that tension from a minor key, versus with a major key, it's going to be sometimes what I'll get in the music is it's like too laid back and chill or happy. That's the problem with a major key in this instance. Unless you're going for strictly heroic and I've already won and beat the game, then a major key works can work a bit better. But sometimes what I get is, hey, maybe the robots aren't so bad with this music, or I get like happy dance party with the music, where it's upbeat and like a strong dance beat, but it's still like not too dark and intense, and like you have to imagine that these robots are chasing you with lasers and rocket launchers, and they are really mad that you're there, and certainly you're there to defeat them, and nobody's happy about it. So you want to avoid anything that's too slow or laid back or easy or happy or too silly or anything like that. You want to make sure that you're going for that tension, that intensity, that aggressiveness, that that action feel as you go back and forth. So let me switch over real quick to the PDF. Where is that? When you not only do you get the video here and the game, you get a PDF that looks like this. And let me go through a couple of things, and I'll talk about the actual WAV files and the delivery and like what you're actually creating here. Game overview. It's going to talk a lot about ambient and action. This is really a summary of everything that I'm talking about here, where, and this is a very common approach in games. Angry Bots is known as a third-person shooter, which means most of the game you're battling some evil bad guy, and you've got either a laser or a machine. In this case, you're equipped with like a machine gun, and you are constantly going back and forth between moving through the level and actually engaging and battling with an enemy. Very, very common approach in games, and this is a challenge that a lot of games and a lot of game composers encounter. I have to quickly and musically go back and forth between lower intensity and higher intensity, and I have no clue when it's going to happen. So what we do is we create music at lower intensity and higher intensities, and we figure out a way to transition back and forth. So, and we'll talk about how that is going to work. How to play. Maybe you've already gotten a chance to play the game. Definitely take the chance, play the game, get a sense or a feel of it. If you're familiar with mouse and keyboard gaming, then WASD work, or you can use the arrow keys to move forward, back, left, and right. The mouse aims, and left click fires the weapon. Reference listening. There's a couple of different game soundtracks to reference in this sort of style. Musical style, high-end energy, over-the-top music production style, like fast electronic or epic metal. Big, loud, strong, intense music styles definitely help this composition, this project. So rock, metal, electronic, heavy orchestral, that type of instrumentation will work. Synths, large pads, driving bass lines, gated effects, sweeping filters, bouncing delays, fast percussion, heavy distorted guitars, big fast drums, large brass and strings, cymbal swells. All of those are just big, loud, strong, impactful instruments. So that is the main theme, the main aesthetic that we're going for. Music system, more about ambient and action, and I'll take you on a play-by-play here in a little bit. And also I got some examples to show off. With screenshots and a bit of information about each one of the cues. And here at the asset list. All right. So ultimately, what you will be delivering are 7 audio files. And they are an ambient loop that is going to be over a minute long. All of these are going to be 16-bit 44.1 stereo files. Ambient loop, then 3 action loops. They're each going to be 8 bars. The ambient loop is heard when you are not battling with one of the robots. The action cues are heard when you are battling with one of the robots. And there are 3 different types of robots. Each gets their own individual action theme. Those action themes are only 8 bars. You might have noticed in the video that the battles are really quite short. You don't have to, it doesn't really take all that long to actually defeat one of these robots. So you want to make sure that the music doesn't constantly jump in and jump out and on and off. So we have to, we'll have to address that aspect of it. But the 8 bars, most of the battles are not going to even make it through 8 bars of music. Or even if it just loops one time, that'll take up most of the battles. So beyond, these are the main 4 pieces of music that's mostly going to be heard. Music stingers. The stingers are there. Notice that they're really short, only 1 to 3 seconds, and they are strong, sharp impacts that are meant to hide the transition between ambient and action. So let me take a moment here. I'm going to go back to the video and give you the play-by-play of how this is going to work. Actually, let me take one quick pause here before we get into this and let the video roll. Let me know if you have any questions so far. Okay. Let me back this up here. So, I'm going to start talking about the ambient and the action cues first. We have one ambient cue that is a minute long. It's the longest file because it's going to be heard most often. Then your 3 action cues, those are each 8 bars long. And those happen when the battles happen. So let's talk about how the game knows how to switch back and forth between these pieces of music. If nothing else is happening, and from the start of the game, you hear the ambient cue. If the player just finds a corner and just stands there forever, they are going to hear that ambient cue. Here in the chat, how long can we go on with the ambient music? The cue is supposed to be 1 minute to 2 minutes long. I have some examples, and I'll kind of discuss more of the content and what they might sound like here in a bit. The ambient, so if nothing else is happening, they're going to hear that ambient cue. So that's why it's so long. If they just stand around doing nothing, it's just going to keep going around and around. So then, how does the game know when to switch to action? And then how does the game know when to switch back to ambient? And we said that the action music is heard during the battles. So then how does the game know when the battles are happening? So let's go through this. So the ambient cue plays. This robot here is called the buzzer bot. And it's kind of like flies around, and it's meant to be like annoying, I think, and zaps you. It has this laser, like a lightning bolt that comes out, shoots out right there, and zaps you, and just kind of flies around. It doesn't take much to defeat it, and it would just kind of keep flying around and keep zapping you. So this is a battle, right? As soon as it zaps you and you fire it at it, there's some battle going on. So we need to have the game know that that's happening. So the real answer here is that the game uses health points in the game to determine when the battles start and stop. So your character has health points, and the enemy robot has health points. You have a whole lot more health points than any one robot. So it takes a lot of hits on you constantly all the way through the level to do much damage. But for a robot, it really doesn't have much damage or much health points, so it doesn't take all that much to defeat it. So as soon as somebody loses health points, the game is going to switch from ambient to action. So the game always knows which characters are on screen. It knows which robots are there, and it knows where your character is. So as soon as somebody takes damage, as soon as you get zapped here, the game says, oh, the main player has taken damage, so that must mean the battle has started. So we are going to switch from ambient over to action. And this happens immediately. It hard cuts from one to the next. And you are not guaranteed in where you are going to be in the ambient queue when this switch happens. So it's just going to hard cut from one to the next. And that works because you're in battle now. You just got lost health points. You just took damage. All right, now it's on. We're going to battle for a little bit. And then somebody's going to win, somebody's going to lose, and the music will have to shift. So from the beginning of the game, the ambient cue is playing until somebody takes damage. And at that point, the action music starts. And then until at some point, somebody is at 0 health. Either your character, but more than likely it's one of the robots. So that robot now goes to 0 health, and the game knows that the battle is over. So it doesn't immediately hard cut back to the ambient queue. It's a strong change in intensity. Going from lower intensity ambient music to higher intensity action music works because it's kind of like when your friend jumps out around the corner and scares you, your heartbeat kind of just skyrockets. It like jumps up real quick and it's pounding suddenly, and your natural reaction is that your heartbeat can jump up very, very quickly. So the pace of the music can jump up quickly because now the battle has started. But when your friend jumps out and you realize, oh, it's just your friend and there's no danger, well, your heartbeat doesn't just drop back to where it was. You have to breathe a little bit and calm yourself down, and it returns back to where it was. So we're going to do the same thing with the music. Going from ambient into action, from lower intensity to higher intensity, we're just going to make a sudden jump up. But when the battle is over and you're going from high intensity to low intensity music, we're going to slowly crossfade over 3 seconds to return it back down to normal before the next battle starts. So ambient music is heard. Zap, now the action music instantly hard cuts. Battle is now over, and it crossfades out for 3 seconds. Next one. These are called spider bots, and they're basically like bombs on legs. They jump awake there, and they chase you. They don't have any attack. until they get close enough, and then they just kind of explode. So same sort of thing here. When these guys jump awake like that, they kind of light up. You can see here, this guy jumps, just kind of like pops up. Then the action music immediately starts. With these guys, the battle music or the action music starts when they turn on or they wake up. So this spider action cue plays 8 bars. It loops around and around. Here it would probably play a little longer because I kind of just toy with it and dance around. But eventually, either you destroy it or it gets close enough and it self-destructs. So here's another one. As soon as this jumps awake, the spider action music would start. The battle goes until it's over, and then after 3 seconds, it fades back to the ambient cue. And then as the player progresses through and explores through the level, they're going to hear the ambient cue until the next robot, as this guy jumps awake, then it switches to the spider music instantly, battle's over, and over 3 seconds it fades back. This robot is called the Mech Bot, coming down the hallway here. It's sort of like a boss battle. A little bit more. It takes a little bit more to beat these guys. They're bigger and slower, and they cause more damage. So typically, this is going to be the biggest, strongest part of your composition. These guys are going to be big and have big percussion and drums and strong bass lines and loud, rhythmic, powerful music. With this composition, you can have more variation in the instruments than you did in 2D platformer. When we talked about 2D platformer, we said that all of the cues need to have similar instrumentation so that it seems consistent and almost invisible as it jumps from one to the next. With this one, you should have more change and variation in the instruments that you choose from your spider action cue and your buzzer action cue and your mech action cue. You should have instrumentation that represents each one of these robots. So even if it's not on screen yet, you still can hear it and you know which one's coming for you. So your choice of instruments will match the overall approach or style of that particular robot. So let's listen to some examples here. And I will also talk about the stingers. All right, let's see if this works. So what I have here, these are 4 student submissions. This first column over here are ambient cues. They're about a minute long, minute to 2 minutes, and they are set up or meant to loop. Over here I have action cues. These are each 8 bars long, and each cue represents its own robot. So the instruments and the melodic theme and the rhythms should sort of reflect the feel of that particular robot coming after you. And over here, these are stingers. I'm going to talk a bit more about these as we listen to them and figure out what their use is. So we'll start here with the first ambient cue. So it starts out as just a kind of a pad or a drone, which it shouldn't just be a pad or drone all the way through. There needs to be a bit of rhythm, maybe even a melodic theme or idea, and there needs to be change in the instrumentation. Here comes a strong change. So sometimes I discuss the ambient cue could be thought of more like musical sound design. There is a couple of ways to approach it. You could go with something that is more traditional composition, where you have drums, bass, harmony, and melody, and use and develop those ideas over the minute cue. Or you could use it as more texture and tones, taking more of a musical sound design approach. So it is using musical instruments, using synths, using effects and processing to create more of an interesting soundscape overall that might include or probably should include a bit of rhythm. Do you have having a little bit of percussion or rhythm in there foreshadows the pace that you have coming up in the action cues. So change and development, one of the biggest things that I find when grading these is that the instrumentation, once it's established in the ambient cue, doesn't really change all that much. So you want to make sure that you have variation and development over the course of the cue. With the action loops, or the action cues, these are set up to loop. They are 8 bars. They need to be strong and intense. One of the main things we're listening for compositionally is making sure that the action cues are the loudest and strongest portion of your mix. However big and loud and strong you make the ambient cue, your action cues just need to be even bigger and louder and stronger. So typically full drum kit or strong kick snare pattern, a memorable lead that is recognizable for that particular robot, powerful bass lines. Intensity is the main thing that we're listening for. So here are, we have one 8-bar cue for the buzzer cue, we have one for the mech, and we have one for spider. Set up to loop. There should be some variation and difference between the first 4 bars and the second 4 bars. You'll hear this mech cue has different instrumentation. Kind of represents a different feel for the cue. Third one here, spider. So you can hear that each one has its own rhythm. It has its own melodic and harmonic and strong bass instrumentation. So these are going to create a particular voice or theme for that robot. And making sure as we go back and forth, you are probably best to maintain a similar key as you switch back and forth between the ambient and all 3 action cues. That way there isn't a strong harmonic jump between the 2 cues, especially as you're kind of going back and forth pretty quickly. You typically want to maintain a similar tempo through all of the cues, but use double time and half time to create variations in the rhythm. So in your action cues, let's see, this buzzer cue is more of what I would consider the bass tempo of everything. Then the mech has more of a halftime feel because it's a bigger robot, stronger, kind of lumbering around. Well, they're actually at a similar tempo and feel, but they both have a halftime feel. Then with the spider cue, it's got more of a double time feel. Sitting on those eighth notes because it kind of matches like the skittering feet of the spider bot as it roams the level. So using things like halftime and double time can definitely help create the intensity change as you move back and forth. In the chat here, I would like to create more of a soundscape for the ambient cue, but I'm not very good at composing electronic music styles. Do you think there's a way to go between electronic sounds for the ambience and orchestral for the action? I might actually go for orchestral for the ambient because you have more time to develop melodic and harmonic ideas, and then with the action cues, since they're short and meant to be much more intense and a little bit kind of techy and robotic, switching over to action for those, especially since you may not feel as comfortable with the action or with the electronic side of things. So yeah, the answer is yes. You can go, well, I wouldn't say entirely go back and forth. Probably a better way of approaching is, let's say you do most kind of more of an electronic feel for the ambient cue. Have some strain of orchestral instrument, maybe a cello or some brass risers or something in the ambient cue that's then much more focused in the action cue, and the same both ways. So whichever order you choose the different genres, then have an instrument or a layer of each one of them in the other ones so that it's not just such a strong difference between them. So all right. Yeah, I would think those would be good approaches for that. Now, I want to talk about the stinger cues and their use here. Two issues with how the music is going to switch by itself. As I mentioned, when we go from ambient to action, it is a hard cut. So I'm going to fake all of this and set this up in Logic here. So let's say we were rolling through our ambient cue, and then a buzzer bot came out to attack, and we are going to hard cut from one to the next. Let me just make sure that that's somewhat lined up. It's going to hard cut from ambient over to action. You know what? I'm just going to do it all on the same track. So I'm going to just drag these around. It's going to hard cut from ambient over to action. And then when action is done, it is going to crossfade back into ambient. So let me create a crossfade here. Something like that. Now the game, of course, is going to do this way better than I am. Just clicking around here in Logic. But general idea is ambient loop plays, buzzer bot jumps. The battle starts with the buzzer bot. It hard cuts from one to the next. You beat the buzzer bot. It crossfades out over 3 seconds and fades in over 3 seconds back to the ambient loop. I have no idea if that's actually 3 seconds, but hopefully we can get the idea here. So I think here's the ambient cue. And it's going to hard cut over to the buzzer. And the battle's over, and it's going to crossfade back to ambient. and goes back to ambient and allows the whole process to start all over again. So one thing you might notice is that change and transition in the buzzer cue is very sudden. And so having some instrumentation of the ambient cue also present in the action cues helps that transition a little bit. But the stingers also help that quite a bit. So the stingers are going to sit here. Go off the fade tool. They're going to sit right, oh my goodness, I lost it. Right where the action cue comes in. And they are there to help this transition so that it isn't so sudden. It kind of takes attention, distracts, and says, hey, look over here, listen to this real quick while I switch from one to the next. And it also provides randomness and variation. Every time you battle one of the buzzer bots, you are going to hear that exact same buzzer bot action cue. But each time it's going to randomly choose one of 3 stingers to play at the front to create some variation, some randomization. So let's try this. I don't even know if this is going to work or sound correct, but whatever. We'll see what it sounds like. And it sounds very, very quiet. That's what it sounds like. So it provides a little variation there, so that it creates distraction, and there's change every single time one of these plays. Yeah. So you got that. You got one there. Got one there. This is less than exciting. This one's kind of less than exciting. This one works very well. So a stinger should be a short, sharp impact that using musical instrumentation. It should not have anything rhythmic or harmonic or melodic, because that can run the issue of clashing with the action cues. So you want to make sure that it hits really hard and then gets out of the way very quickly. Here's some other stingers. This is a bad example of a stinger, right? That's just like a short 90s orchestra hit. That one works all right. I would say that is the most basic form of a stinger, which is like a big bass drum or kick drum and a cymbal crash. And it's more of like a sound effect. Every once in a while I'll hear sound effects. You got to watch out for that. Let's see how well these work. These work well. These are more like, if you're familiar with EDM drops, big builds and impacts with kicks and cymbal crashes and turnarounds, there should be, those are very good kind of templates for this kind of sound. They should not be a musical phrase like this. This is another bad example. So musical phrases that have rhythm and tone to them are just going to cause issue when they're played against the action cues. So something that's quick, something that has a sharp, strong impact at the front, something typically with a big bass hit or bass drop in it, something with often a cymbal crash works, and then some cool modulating sound that either kind of twists and turns or gates or stutters or there's all sorts of fun effects that you can use right along with it. So stingers, again, are there to cause distraction and create some variation in the playback of your music. Let me try some other ones here. So here is an ambient cue. This one's more like what I would consider a traditional composition, with progression and melody, rhythm, and changes throughout the cue. And then there is, here's the action cues. So you make sure that it brings up the intensity and pace of the music. So hopefully these are going to be giving you some good ideas and direction for this composition, and ways that you might head. Other ideas here. Make sure your composition matches the genre of the game. Again, it's much more of a stylistic approach than 2D platformer. We did leave 2D platformer a bit more wide open to your compositional approach to it. So this make sure you match the style and feel. Ambient and action need to transition immediately. So keeping the same rhythm, key, and similar instrumentation between both helps that process. Action transitions back to ambient after 3 seconds. You don't know when anything is going to be triggered, so watch out for timing differences. Tempo changes, time signature changes, all of that cause just rhythmic hardships in your composition. Most of the rest of that is stuff that is pretty standard. Okay, so take a look through the PDF, watch the video, play the game, start getting some compositional ideas together. And I failed to mention, actually, let me go back to FSO here. I didn't even talk about the fact that none of this is actually due this Sunday. We have spring break next weekend. So I'm sure we're all going to the beach and partying all the time. And no, I'm sure you're at home practicing your scales and your chord progressions and being a good student. Whatever you end up doing on spring break, or maybe just sleeping, whatever. Then you don't actually have your homework due this Sunday. It is due the 23rd, the Sunday after spring break. So also no class next week. We will meet back up in week 4, but that did just the schedule did remind me that we don't have anything due directly this week. So maybe you work on this for a little while, and you also work on our other composition for this week, your chiptune composition. So as I mentioned, we talked a bit about the history of game consoles and different music genres, the technology and the music and the capabilities of games over the different decades. And you're already getting a feel for what it's like to compose for modern games and modern styles. But to give you a sense of where we are at now, we're going to go all the way back to where this began, so you can see what some of the ideas and challenges that they were dealing with then even are still some of the same challenges we deal with today. But you are going to compose in the style of what is commonly known as 8-bit chiptune music, or also sometimes known as Nintendo music, because it sounds very much in the style and limitations of the original Nintendo system. So in our discussion last week, we said that most of the melody and harmony and rhythm of these original Nintendo soundtracks were created with 4 basic waveforms. There was a 5th sample channel that was used, but most of that was also can be used for sound effects. So a lot of the melody and harmony and rhythm was done with these 4 basic channels, and those are 2 pulse wave channels or square waves, 1 triangle channel, which was mostly for bass, and 1 noise channel, that white noise channel, that was for percussion. So provided with this assignment, you get the PDF that kind of outlines everything. But provided with this assignment, you get a logic session that has everything that you need to work on this composition. And so mainly we're concerned with the restrictions, like composing within the restrictions of the original Nintendo. So you only have 4 simultaneous sounds. These 4 channels each have an EXS24 loaded up on them, and in that EXS24 there are sound banks that have sounds and waveforms pulled from the original Nintendo system and the Famicom system, which was the earlier version of the Nintendo in Japan. So you listen through these and you'll probably hear some very, very familiar types of sounds that you can use for your composition. So those sound banks are loaded up across tracks 1, 2, 3, and 4. So you are limited to only 4 tracks at any one time. Now, that means you can have more than 4 tracks, but only 4 ever play at once. So we've easily had people with compositions that are 10s and 20 tracks deep that are just constantly switching between different layers. So, and the original Nintendo could do this. It only could play 4 sounds simultaneously, but it could switch between the timbre or the tone of those sounds very, very quickly. So we have those loaded up. So how you use those 4 channels is up to you. Another requirement of this project is you have to have drums, you have to have a melody, and you have to change the sound or the tone of that lead melody at some point in the composition. So you need to have drums, you need to have melody. That means you have 2 channels left. That means you can have drums, bass, harmony, melody. You could have drums, bass, melody, counter melody. You could have drums, harmony, melody, melody. Just there's all sorts of fun combinations. So what instruments you choose, up to you, with the limitation or with the restriction. You have to have drums, you have to have melody. Then what else? What other? You can change your lead sound. You can have multiple sounds, but only 4 at any one time. When we started this composition, when we started this project, I was kind of worried about the quality of the compositions, because the sounds are so bad, quote unquote bad, that that it would end up sounding like I don't know, like Fisher Price music or something. Really, something really cheesy overall. And I found that compositionally, these are some of the best projects because this, again, since the sounds are so bad, you are kind of focused on using harmony and melody to create more interesting compositions. I think some of the maybe drawbacks of having almost endless choices in your DAW is a lot of people, they spend a lot of time when they're starting to write music just switching between sounds, switching between presets, trying to find a cool and interesting sound. And once they find that sound, then they write a melody around whatever that sound is, versus the other way around, of writing a melody first compositionally and then determining what sound you actually want it to sound like. Well, in this composition, the sounds are so bad that's not really much of the concern. So you're focused so much more on harmony and melody, you end up getting some pretty strong results. So I have a couple of examples here that I want to play, and somewhere. I think this is going to work. I may not have complete volume control, but here, these are all student submissions from this composition. Now, these are some of the best, but this just shows you where this can go overall. Oh, hold on, I don't think I have. I want more volume control. Hold on. Let's try this. Down a little bit. Now. Especially a part like this. So, lots of movement.